Imagine there were two versions of Toys R Us. The first was the one you saw. The endless aisles, the bright lights, the giant giraffe at the door. At the checkout of that company, cash registers were still ringing. In many locations, that business was profitable on its own terms. But there was a second company, hidden from view. A company that existed only on paper, in a ledger. And in that second company, an invisible machine was devouring cash. $400 million a year, every year, gone before a single toy could be restocked. This invisible machine was an echo of a deal made years earlier. In July 2005, a trio of private equity and real estate firms, KKR, Bain Capital, and Vornado Realty Trust, bought Toys R Us for $6.6 billion. It was a leveraged buyout, or LBO. In simple terms, the buyers put up some of their own money, but borrowed the rest, billions of dollars, and placed that debt onto Toys R Us itself. The company was forced to carry the cost of its own acquisition. From that day forward, every dollar of profit had a first claim against it. Not to improve stores, not to build a website, but to pay the interest on the money used to buy it. To understand the tragedy, you have to remember the giant it once was. The idea started simply. In 1948, its founder, Charles Lazarus, returned from World War II and opened a baby furniture store. He noticed a pattern. Parents would buy a crib once, but they kept coming back for toys. The toys had no warranty, no returns, and the customers were always new. Lazarus pivoted. He created a supermarket for toys, a revolutionary idea. Instead of a small, curated toy shop, he built a giant warehouse with towering aisles, deep inventory, and low prices. By the 1970s and 80s, this model became what the retail industry calls a category killer. The scale was immense. Toys R Us could buy products from Mattel or Hasbro in such massive volumes that no department store or mom-and-pop shop could compete on price. It defined the market. A trip there wasn't just shopping. It was a childhood pilgrimage. The jingle, "I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid," was a cultural anthem. For decades, if you were a parent, a birthday, or a holiday meant a mandatory trip to the house that Jeffrey the Giraffe built. The ultimate symbol of this dominance rose in the heart of New York City. The flagship store in Times Square was more than a store. It was a tourist destination, a three-story palace of play with a life-sized Barbie dream house and a roaring animatronic T-Rex. And at its center, the main attraction, a 60-foot indoor Ferris wheel. Families would line up to ride it, circling high above the shoppers below. It was a monument to the company's scale and success. It felt permanent, as unshakable as the city itself. But even at the peak, cracks were forming. The first was digital. In the year 2000, with the dot-com bust fresh in everyone's mind, building an online retail operation seemed risky and expensive. So Toys R Us made a deal that seemed clever at the time. It would outsource its entire e-commerce business to a rising online bookseller called Amazon. The terms were clear, a 10-year exclusive partnership. Amazon would handle the website and the shipping, and Toys R Us would be the exclusive toy seller on the platform. The problem was, Amazon had its own ambitions. It soon began allowing other third-party toy sellers to list products on its site, effectively breaking the spirit and the letter of the exclusivity deal. Toys R Us sued, and after a lengthy legal battle, a court allowed it to break the contract in 2006. But the damage was done. For 6 crucial years, from 2000 to 2006, Toys R Us had essentially paid Amazon to learn the toy business while its own online skills atrophied. When it finally re-entered the e-commerce race, rivals like Walmart and Target were miles ahead, and Amazon was Amazon. The second crack was the LBO itself. The logic for the private equity firms was that Toys R Us was a stable, cash-generating business. They could use that cash flow to service the debt, streamline operations, and eventually sell the company for a profit. But this plan put the company in a financial straitjacket. That $400 million in annual interest wasn't a one-time cost. It was a relentless, yearly drain. It was money that couldn't be used to modernize aging stores, to invest in a better website, or to lower prices to compete with Walmart. By the early 2010s, customers could feel the decay. The stores that were once magical started to look tired. The carpets were worn. The lighting was dim. The checkout process was clunky. It wasn't that the company didn't know how to fix these things. It was that it couldn't afford to. Every proposal for capital expenditure had to compete with the non-negotiable interest payments. The debt turned every routine challenge of modern retail into a crisis. It starved the business of the very oxygen it needed to evolve: cash. Another quiet lifeline was also fraying. For decades, toy manufacturers paid Toys R Us millions in co-op and promotional allowances for prime shelf space and advertising. This money was a crucial subsidy to the company's bottom line. But as Walmart and Target grew their toy businesses, they demanded lower prices from vendors, squeezing the amount of promotional money available. The pressure mounted. In December 2015, the most visible symbol of the company's troubles appeared. The Times Square flagship, with its iconic Ferris wheel, closed its doors for good. The soaring rent was simply too much for a company bleeding cash. The monument was no longer affordable. The end came swiftly. On September 18, 2017, with its debt deadlines looming, Toys R Us filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. This wasn't meant to be a death sentence. The plan was to restructure the $5 billion debt load while continuing to operate. The company secured over $3 billion in new financing, specifically to stock the shelves for the upcoming holiday season. The message to suppliers was clear. We have the money. Ship us the toys. This Christmas will be business as usual. It was a bet-the-company moment. But trust, once broken, is hard to repair. The news of the bankruptcy filing created a panic among the very suppliers Toys R Us needed to survive. Decades-long relationships evaporated overnight. Worried they wouldn't get paid for their products, major vendors like Mattel and Hasbro tightened their credit terms. Some demanded cash on delivery, an impossible request for a retailer that buys billions in inventory. The $3 billion in emergency financing wasn't enough to calm the nerves. The supply chain seized up at the worst possible moment. As the holidays approached, the consequences became brutally clear. Parents walked into stores looking for the season's hottest toys and found empty spaces on the shelves. Inventory that was supposed to arrive in October showed up in late November, or not at all. You cannot sell a toy that isn't there. The weak holiday sales were the final nail in the coffin. The cash flow needed to fund the restructuring never materialized. The company had failed its one last critical test. The math no longer worked. On March 15, 2018, the company announced the unthinkable. It would liquidate all of its U.S. operations. The shutdown was swift and brutal. Roughly 735 stores went dark. Around 33,000 American employees lost their jobs. A 70-year-old retail icon, a staple of American childhood, was gone. Not because children stopped loving toys, but because the numbers on a balance sheet, forged in a deal 13 years earlier, finally demanded to be paid. Ironically, the death of the U.S. company proved that the core business wasn't entirely broken. The Canadian division, which was managed more conservatively and wasn't burdened by the same level of debt, remained profitable. It was sold to a financial firm and continues to operate today. The Asian joint venture was also successfully sold. This proved the central thesis: the toy stores could work. What couldn't work was a toy store that also had to function as a hedge fund's debt repayment vehicle. The private equity owners lost their initial investment, but it's worth noting that over the years, Toys R Us had paid them hundreds of millions in advisory and monitoring fees, a common practice in LBOs where the firms charge the company for their own oversight. The biggest losers, besides the employees, were the toy makers themselves. Mattel and Hasbro didn't just lose a customer, they lost their single biggest showroom. Walmart sells toys, but it doesn't build brands. Toys R Us was where new ideas were launched and discovered. Its absence left a vacuum in the entire industry. So what is the final lesson of Toys R Us? It's that a business can survive on thin margins, but it cannot survive without oxygen. Free cash flow is a company's oxygen. It's what allows it to adapt, to invest, to weather storms. The 2005 leveraged buyout took a company with fixable problems, aging stores and a late start online, and strapped an anchor of debt to its neck. It removed all margin for error. In the end, it wasn't Amazon or Walmart that delivered the final blow. It was the balance sheet. A company can look alive at the register but be drowning in the back office.